guys.
Yo, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Theory Underground. Great to have you all here with us today. We've got a couple of people joining us virtually by Zoom, and here we are in the AGORA in Virginia. Yep, over here at the OG Rose Estate. They've got the whole operation. They got the kids. They got the beautiful husband and wife, their mom, the dad, and the food is so good, and we feel so happy to be here. Let's say a couple things about it.
Beautiful land and musical instruments and books and Lego and little puff balls that Ryan likes to play with, and it's been like truly a delightful time here. Tour can get very stressful, and this has been not stressful, chaotic, but not in a bad way.
Yeah,
for me, and like an energizing chaos.
True. What else to say about that? Yeah, this is the last night that we're here.
I have to say, I had the pleasure of meeting Daniel's father, and he's cool, dude. Like, your dad's just a cool cat. You know, he came over a few times and he brought some foodstuffs and kind of did his thing and came over after the fact, and we chit-chatted a little bit while we were out having our shindig, and yeah, man, he's just cool. And we've had the opportunity to just kind of be people, and we've done a lot. Like, is this the third Agora in 3 days?
Yeah.
So we've done more Agoras in the last 3 days than we managed to do in the last 3 months. So that's excellent, and that comes at the gracious hosts putting up with us, putting us up, and also being a part of what we're doing, and making it really vital, really kind of full of love and life and energy. And also the conversation has been excellent. So yeah, it has been really, really good. And those of you that are watching via a device, you should make a point to get to know these folks, because they're amazing. So
yeah, they got a whole thing on YouTube. You can check it out. There's also books and stuff, stories and poetry if you're into that, philosophy and theory if you're into that. Pretty much sky's the limit. We've had a couple of great conversations. You know, yesterday we did the trade-off theory. The day before that we did something on, whoa, it was really good. Oh, retroversion. Yeah. Anyway, so my students here in Soc 122 especially are on spring break right now. We have one virtually present. She's multitasking. She's doing other things. So shout out. But you know, it's good that she's here as kind of a reminder that this is actually something we're trying to keep within pretty tight time constraints, because of the fact that it is for a class at Boise State, but it is also something that will go up on Theory Underground and the Agora page. theoryunderground.com/Agora is now live. You can actually go there. You can check it out. Thanks, Alexander Spoon, for making that happen, getting it up, getting it live, which means that all the events on for the Agora, at least the A-side ones, you'll be able to see there on that page. And I think we're going to make it so that real subscribers are actually able to access the B-side ones. I don't know. That's the goal. But so, all right, what are we talking about today? Communication versus conversation. And I'm going to kind of open it up here in a second. I just have a couple preliminary remarks. And so for the people in this course or at TU, to the TU subscribers as well, recently we've been talking a lot about solitude versus solicitude, and we initially get this distinction, though she doesn't quite put it in such terms, from Sherry Turkle in her book Reclaiming Conversation. That's where she introduces the virtuous circle between these two things. Genuine time with oneself versus genuine time with others. These two things are predicated upon one another. You got to have both. And if you don't get both, if your smartphone or your time energy, your lack thereof, is making it so that you're not really able to get that genuine time with self or others, we fall into the vicious cycle of MCM prime, of idle talk or idle chatter that is ambiguous and non-committally curious. So it's like, oh, how you doing?
Oh, doing
Well,
that.
yeah, I don't care. But anyway, on to the next thing. Yeah, let's keep going. Okay.
Yo.
Yeah. You start
Yo.
you start to talk about your life a little bit. Their eyes dried up. They're already on their phone, and you're like, "Okay, what am I doing here?" We were just at the skate park. I learned a bunch of new tricks, like how to go up a hill and back down, and a ramp, I think it's called. And I mean, that's a big deal for me. It was terrifying at first, but thanks to Nance, I was able to get it. But he said skate parks are dead now. Like the scene is dying because of people being too much on their phones and stuff. And of course, that's where Anne's point of entry always was with CMT, critical media theory. But I think I want to kick this off with some thoughts from Anne and some thoughts from Nance, and then we're gonna kind of maybe I'll say something more, but then kind of like we're gonna let Daniel kind of get on one and go off. You know what I mean? And so it's like right now we've got like this bulldog on a choke chain, just tearing the wall off, and it's like whoa. But we're gonna let him off. We're gonna let him off the chain. You better climb a tree if you don't want to. Yeah.
He's like the dog that we just saw in downtown that loves skateboards. The owner was like, we were walking. He's like, "Oh, don't let her see your skateboard." And so we're like, "Oh, should we put it down? Will she ride it?" And he's like, "Yeah." We put the skateboard down. Instantly, this dog is just like chewing on the skateboard, flipping around, pushes it,
Just
pushes
barking
it
like
down
crazy.
the sidewalk, and just like watching it roll. So that's you, apparently.
Yeah, no, but actually, for those in Social 122 who didn't see any of the stuff we've done with Daniel so far, he and his family here, we love him. The short version is, they are trying to live the dream here, play music, read books, love each other, and they also write books and do really important work on YouTube and in the theory scene. You ain't nothing until you've been interviewed by them on their channel. We haven't even been interviewed by them. Well, Ann did, but someday I hope to be a guest on that someday, because it's like, to me, it's the big leagues, the major leagues, like the OG Rose channel. But anyway, all right. So sociological communication, Social 122, critical media theory. This is as much Ann's domain as my own. And Nance has been a co-CMT researcher with us for quite a while. And so this distinction between communication and conversation, communication versus conversation. I really want to hear everybody else's thoughts about this. I really want to hear everybody else develop their understanding of the distinction between these two modes or forms. And so we want to theorize these modes or forms. If one is lesser and the other is better for human beings, well, then we want to know a little bit more about that. And so I'm curious about Nance's take on that. I'm curious about Daniel's take on that. But we're going to start off with just a little Social 122 standard kind of recap, communication, and kind of just stuff that comes to mind for you. And then you and I will basically sit here and hystericize or pick the brains of Nance and Daniel, since I think both of them have a lot of thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think when we think of communication, we can often think of it in terms of like an actual major at college, right? You take Communication 101. I think a lot of the professors at Boise State teach the class sociological communication like it is a combination of sociology and communication. So learning how to speak, learning how to write, learning how to give a presentation, how to deal with, if you get to higher levels, you're going to learn conflict management, you're going to learn how to read body language. And so we think of communication in that way. And it's something that we all do every day on our phones. We do it with our body language, we do it with our facial expressions. But in the scope of critical media theory and trying to dig a little bit deeper into this distinction between just communication and conversation, I think something that Sherry Turkle would probably agree with, Unite, right, when we get solitude and solicitude from, is that we do a whole lot of communicating these days with being on our phone. We send our sibling a meme on Instagram. We share a TikTok. We send some texts to our friends. We send Snapchats. That's communicating. But is that solicitude? Is that real conversation, really getting to know someone? The communication that we are able to do on our phone can be a great way to, I think, keep up with other people. Send my siblings pictures of the cats. That's very important communication. Like, get to see little glimpses of their life. But it seems like this is where we stop often. And we think we're connected, right? We can think of connection and communication. We feel overly connected because we get to see everyone, pictures of everyone. We think we kind of know what's going on in their life, but have we talked to them and heard from our friends or family themselves and what their triumphs and struggles are in their life? And so I think, as we start to talk about today, this distinction between communication and conversation, and we can throw in the word connection there, and thinking about the way that technology kind of simulates us feeling connected and like we're communicating with other people. But we have to ask the question, I think, are we having real conversations? Are we building relationships with people? Are we getting to know other people in a deep way where we can say, yeah, I know that person, and their hopes and their dreams and kind of who they are versus the curated image that they put on their profile. And yeah, how can we have real conversations? And so with that, I'll pass it on to Nance.
Yeah, I think the point that technology can simulate this connection kind of highlights one of the points, one of the tensions. Communication is a word that everyone uses, often takes for granted, to just kind of say the thing where you're sharing something with someone or you're getting information from someone. But it also is like a specific term. It is a term in cybernetics and systems theory. And that is like a one-way flow of data. And they'll call that information. Another distinction to be made is data and information. And I like Daniel's where he went when we kind of talked about that the other day. There's a difference between data and information. But there's also like a mutual back and forth that is presupposed often when people say communication, but we never get there because we're just simulating this connection. The word communion, commune with others, community, again, these are all kind of problematic words that we don't have to come down hard on, but they all share this notion of like a mutual space where there's a give and a take. If you've seen that movie where the guy talks to animals, Dr. Dolittle. It's called a push me pull you, and it's a llama with two heads. It's the old Dr. Dolittle, not the new one. But yeah. But there's a llama with two heads, one facing east, one facing west, and it's a push me pull you. And I like to say, oh, it's a push me pull you, it's a push me pull you, and I never explain what I mean or where that comes from, but it is that. It push me pull you. It's a mutual give and take. There's something shared going on. Communion could be a word for it. I don't like it because, again, it has problems. But yeah, conversation gets more to the point of like, this is something you're actually involved in. This is something where there is stakes, whereas communication is this cybernetic term of just, I'm going to give you the information and that's going to incite a response from you. Whereas in conversation, that ambiguity always exists, and it does come down to the actual dimensional people rather than the kind of flattened out mathematical arithmetic functions. And yeah, technology provides a lot of opportunity to maybe approach a conversation, but it also is kind of incumbent on us, the users of the technology, to be aware of our position in this kind of cycle, because it can become very cyclical. So yeah, I think this is a very rich topic of conversation.
So I guess the one thing I kind of want to throw your way here before I give it to you, Daniel, is we were talking about there is an idea in America about real communication, real conversation. If those two are to be maintained as distinct, then I think people would say they're tired of the communication, and what they want is conversation. They do want to reclaim conversation, and so they get involved in like these discursive circles. Discursive meaning discourse ish, right? Like, so you're doing discourse in various circles, and so Alcoholics Anonymous sits in a circle and everybody talks about how they're alcoholics and they're struggling and the kind of things that they're dealing with in their life, right? And you can think of Fight Club and how he gets, after the point that he burns out on consuming, the protagonist starts looking into all of these little like rehab groups and he gets involved with like 20. He's going to the different ones and he's going for prostate cancer, and he doesn't even have prostate cancer, but he just loves the community. He loves the people who are holding each other and crying, and he loves to be held on Big Bob's bosom, and he goes crying together. And this vulnerability, this authenticity, this rawness, it feels so much more real than his sort of collective, or sorry, consumerist sort of apartment that he spent so much time curating using places that look like, oh, what's that giant place? IKEA. Yeah. You know, and so a lot of the people we know have spent a lot of time curating their nice little abodes, and then it gets so nice they don't really see any need to go out anymore, and then they start to wonder where all their friends went, but they've got them kind of on call forever, just a finger's touch away, but then their texts go unread or unresponded to, read and not responded to. People don't check their emails anymore. People see things and don't know how to respond without bringing up too much or too little, and not knowing how it sends weird signals, and people get super neurotic about it and people start to spiral. And so people are seeking real conversation. Occupy Wall Street does this. Democratic Socialists of America does this. Black Lives Matter does this. When people are trying to do something, the spaces kind of get taken over by like various tendencies, but one of the big tendencies is like the people who just really want quality conversations where everybody gets to be their authentic selves and really participate, and like they want to get their turn to have their voice heard, right? And we're not against that, but we think it's more complicated than a lot of those people tend to think, and it's not what we're doing, right? For me, real conversation is also the lecture. Real conversation is also the podcast. Real conversation includes all these various media forms. It might even mean that you monologue for an hour and a half a few times, and then because you got a lot to say and you're working it out and the other person's deep listening, and it might be a little while before that person really has something to give back. But people want it immediately. They want this instantaneous or immediate tit for tat exchange where it's like you talked for 50 seconds, now I talk for 50 seconds, now he talks, now she talks, now he talks, or maybe she he to the back of the line. Let's do the oppression Olympics thing if we're DSA or BLM, and we'll do the point of privilege thing. And if you all don't know about that, well then, it means if you're not the most privileged person in the room, they push you back in the line. They go up, disabled people, please come to the front of the line. And it becomes this big thing where you have to talk about your secret illnesses or whatever before you can actually talk. And you have to, and they're like, well, yeah, you should be authentic. Tell us all about everything. And it's like, okay, well, that's a lot. It's a lot that we kind of want to think deeply about here.
No, magnificent. And it is absolutely fantastic to have y'all here. Thank you for being such wonderful people and guests. And you mentioned my father. Yes, he is awesome. And I was quite fortunate to have a childhood that consisted of standing at the garage and basically talking till 1 a.m. And I don't think, so I was very privileged, lucky, fortunate in that way to have a conversation heavy upbringing, as well as, I was sitting on the porch of my grandfather, or there was a diner I met Mr. Dillard every Friday for like 10 years and talked. And that was very fortunate because you came to experience conversation as this space where something can emerge that is unexpected, that is captivating, that you then want to see where it ends up, that can only possibly come into existence if you are there and if you are present and if you are looking to relate. One of the things, like you were talking about this idea of many organizations wanting to have, say, conversation, and there's this kind of quantification. You spoke 30 seconds, now let's be fair, the next person 30 seconds, et cetera, so forth. One of the reasons why this destroys the possibility of conversation, very similar to when you're doing a jazz improvisation and you start thinking about about the fact you're doing a jazz improvisation. Then you start messing up. Like when you're doing really well in a comedy skit or skating or art, like once you become conscious of it, you fall, right? You have to be able to have a certain self-forgetfulness, right? And so what makes great conversation occur is a certain self-forgetfulness. People talk about flow, and I don't want to over-romanticize that, but there's a certain where you actually get locked in, right? Another key characteristic of a conversation is suddenly 5 hours go by and you don't even notice, right? Where in communication, if I associate that with texting, and of course it is not that communication is always bad or something like that. It's always this ordering principle, right? What's very interesting often with communication is people are nervous to death constantly as they are figuring out the message. And what if I use should I use an exclamation mark or a period? As just a certain, if someone is wondering, well, how can I tell if I'm engaged in communication versus conversation, or communication at the expense of conversation? That nervousness, that awareness that is making a certain sort of anxiety is a very important characteristic. Whereas in conversation, time goes by very quickly and you actually lose yourself in it. And there is actually something I think that when people talk about wanting relationships and wanting community, they're actually talking about that particular qualitative experience. Because also in that, when people talk about recognition or say being acknowledged or different thing, well, the problem is that can become egotistical, that can become quantification. But if there's this certain connection where you forget yourself, there's a certain recognition that, oh, we're in the flow, right? When you're doing a good jazz improvisation, there are moments and glimmers where you go, oh, this is happening. But then the great artist is able to immediately go back into it, right? Like they're able to forget right back into it, right? That is, I think, the recognition that people are really looking for. That can only be found in a social setting when people have conversation. But then the question becomes the following: what are the capacities and capabilities necessary by which to be the sort of subject of whom can actually participate in those sort of activities, right? And I think one of the reasons perhaps there is almost a indirect incentive to believe that there is only communication is because communication does not have anything to do with self-cultivation or virtue or technique or anything, right? It's just the exchange of the information. And if I put it in the cell phone, or if I, ask about the weather, I've gone through the script. I've done all of those things, and everyone can know the script, and it's kind of democratic, really. Small. There's a kind of democracy, if you will, in a problematic way with small talk, right? But then if that's the only option, then I'm not missing out on anything, or I haven't messed up, right? There isn't a horizon that I am not failing to go toward. I also think about conversation. There's a moment, I guess, when I was mystified by words. Like, you actually notice words. It sounds very odd because you use words, but then one day you go, wait, words exist. And they're things, and I'm using words, and I can use words to describe words and think about words and use them in different contexts, and they do different things. Oh, this is a creative act. There is a fundamental creative act at the heart of words. And I know the great Cleo is with us. I think this is one of the great advantages of reading literature, is you actually come to realize words are these creative principles. They are not merely representatives of an idea or these kind of data placeholders. No, they are participating in the act of conversation and the ability to use words and to think about words and to examine words and to take a kind of meta examination of how that word was used, and is there a different word, and what's a simile of that. Suddenly, once you have that sort of realization that you're using words, you've actually started the road toward conversation. Because when you learn you can converse about words or notice, hey, a different word could be used. If I talk about, well, just a clear example, the difference between love and like, right? We all know there's a difference. Well, let's talk about that. Well, bam, now we have a conversation, right? When you notice that actually different words suggest different pathways and that they're not all similes, there is now actually something that's kind of mysterious. There's something interesting to start conversing, right? One of the problems I think with communication is you never get mystified by words. You never actually are taken by words and the fact that love and like are not the same, right? They just become options. This is another way to put it. Most of these words are just options, right? They don't in themselves entail different ideas, right? The great Bernard Hankins, the great hip hop artist, Cypher Mentality, I adore. He's a tremendous individual. He always said that his kind of philosophy was based on the idea that words contain ideas, that it is not merely that words represent ideas, but that words have ideas in them. And when you talk about words or you think about words, and how many philosophers are interested in that, or poets are actually paying attention to words, suddenly ideas open up in the very awareness and attention of words, right? Like there's a push today, whether it be a McGilchrist or an Illich or Simone Weil, on the idea that so much of the human is the ability to have attention and to be aware, right? If you can actually be aware, you go a long way, right? For Simone Weil, basically the choice was between what he called affliction or awareness. And affliction is where you're stuck in a certain trajectory of life, a certain pathway, and you can't imagine ever leaving it, right? And so he saw that as the working class, whereas he was looking at people, it's like, well, it's not merely that they're afflicted, they're not able to even think an alternative, so they're on a single pathway, right? Awareness is when you start to see that there are alternatives, right? My point is that communication tends for us to actually be afflicted by language more than language be in a feedback loop with awareness that actually creates us as we create it. And then if you know that is a possibility, when you converse with other people, you are looking for those different pathways and different ways to go that you don't know are there until you start talking about them. Because it is when you suddenly go, hey, what's the difference between, is there a difference between worry and anxiety? Is there a difference between fear and wisdom? How can you tell at what point, Michelle and I talk about this all the time, at what point is it, wise not to say do something dangerous? And at what point are you being afraid not to do something dangerous, right? Critically note also that this question that starts with noticing a difference between words then actually leads to a real question that has stakes. Like it really matters to be able to tell the difference of when you should face a fear and when it's wise not to face that fear, right? Like if there was a lion outside, I could go outside and quote unquote face my fear, but wouldn't that actually be stupid? Right? That skunk. There was a friggin' skunk. Right.
Our cat, Ryan, was exploring outside last night, and then we came outside to get him, and we saw something scuttlebutting across the yard, and we were like, that's a friggin' skunk. And so like we started kind of walking after it just to kind of check around to see where Ryan was. Ryan comes out around the back of the garage, sees that skunk, and then he starts going towards the skunk. And we're like, stop. And I picked up a stick and I was like thinking about throwing it to try to ward off Ryan. And I was like, we were just all like, it was like very high alert moment.
We're walking towards the skunk. Everyone's possibility of getting sprayed in this moment is just increasing. The skunk at one point like turned and looked at Ryan, and I'm like, oh no, it's about to happen.
You think I'm afraid of you?
Yeah, Ryan's afraid of you. Ryan's like, I can be your friend. Ryan's like, I just want to be your friend.
They had an understanding. The skunk looked at Ryan. They had an understanding. And well, I would actually argue that often, like this is kind of one of the points, is there's that famous idea that the limits of my language are the limits of my world from Wittgenstein. Well, that would also suggest that the expressions of my language are the expressions of my world. The more limited I am in my expressions, or the more I just use words as similes, then I actually have I have a less refined qualitative experience of the world. And I like to say qualitative sometimes versus qualitative, because your language, well, Rita Dove, many of the poets will put this. They'll say like, when a word dies, so is lost an ability of experience. Like the more language you learn, the more you can actually experience. Like language is not arbitrary. Like the language you know actually opens you up for more experience, right? What I think often actually occurs is philosophy for many people does not start necessarily because they go, oh, or well, the idea of wonder, right? That I think there are different forms of wonder, but one of the sources of wonder that I think can happen that gets people into philosophy, just as to close these opening thoughts, is one day where you realize there is a difference between love and like. Well, that's weird. Like, how do I know that? I know there's a difference. And you start remembering, you start sensing that there have been different experiences that have gone on. Or you say, I know there's a difference between, say, beauty and symmetry. Like, I know this, right? But you don't have it at hand. You're trying to recall it, almost like Minnow, to bring it forth. And you start counting like, how I know, and you're wondering in this kind of idea that these things are different, and you're trying to figure it out, right? And in trying to figure out the language, you're actually trying to figure out differences in the world, because the expressions of your language are the expressions of the world. And I think critically, basically, the difference between communicating and conversing with someone is when you're conversing with someone, you actually feel they're on that journey with you, actually. They too have sensed that there is a difference between these terms, and they mean different things, like the difference between conversation and communication. We know that there are different ways of talking. We've experienced it. We sense it, but but you need to talk it out to move it to a place where you can make it better part of the texture of your reality, like more of the terrain of your world, right? And you find other people to have that conversation with, who then, well, you feel that kinship in them doing that work with you, and they doing that in back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the reason why also I think this is so important as well is because if indeed there is something about language that profoundly shapes the human being, and our relation with language is one not of refinement or knowing there are differences between these terms, that it all becomes kind of just a big blob, right? It all is just, they're just words, and words are just personal preference. They don't signal, they're not pointing toward different paths of experience. It's just, I like the word blue, you like the word Celine, it's all personal preference. It's a form of expression, expressing, right? But it doesn't really mean anything. Well, once you do that, then basically there's only a single trajectory that people can go on, right? And a way to look at, for me, communication is it's sending people down a single trajectory, and that trajectory is flattening. It's removing dymorphism, and it's actually, it's actually how we are in a way being oppressed today. It's not necessarily that Big Brother is threatening you, saying I'm going to be, of course, there's reality to that, nor is it necessarily Huxley using pleasure to deceive you. It's by having a language that basically in practice has a single directionality that you end up in a destination where you lose the full dynamicism of human being. And so there's something about conversation that is the reclaiming of the human, that philosophy, for me, uniquely can bring a person to conversation, not because you're interested in, these super big ideas of metaphysics or whatever, but because that the way of talking philosophical becomes kind of meta, where you're asking about the words themselves. You do a vertical move on conversation. You converse about conversation. And when you do that, instead of just going straight in a straight line of communication, you have a circle. There's a self-right. Well, now you've added a different trajectory. There's a different path you can go on. So it is not necessarily the case you must end up at the end of the Kafka hallway. You can now have different movement in your thinking, right? Well, that right there, even if the first move is self-reference, that opens up, well, then there are other directions than one way. Well, then how many other ways might there be, right? And then you start thinking and conversing. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah. And that which way we go ties in nicely with Postman in the school book, which I just read the first page of today, thanks to David Ruiz, in which it says something like, oh man, what was the, sorry, lost it. I instantly lost it because I saw something. What was the, oh geez, what was that?
I was saying, once you realize you can go multiple ways.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Education is a lifelong process of negotiation with reality. Yep. That's what he said. A lifelong process of negotiation with reality, and your school can be measured by whether it's, doing,
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
That's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
By the criteria or criterion of how well it actually sets you up to negotiate with reality. And that means, I mean, how can you manipulate your social reality? Can you conquer it? Or does it make you docile like a puppet to it? Does it teach you that there's only one way? Right? Does it teach you that words are just the things in the dictionary? It's all been said and decided on before you were born. When of course there's multiple meanings for lots of words. And then instead of sitting there thinking like, really, what's the difference between these things? People just go, oh, we'll look it up. And it's like, but the human, reclaiming the human, means asking yourself these questions and then picking other people's brains about it.
Yeah, and I like what you said about that you'd gotten from some other thinkers, but so much of the human is the ability to be aware or to have attention. And something that I think has come up multiple times, not only in the last few days, but even on tour, is the importance of attention span today, almost as a more important indicator of, I don't know, where you're at and what you're capable of than other markers that we're familiar with, like IQ or something like that. And so, kind of bringing it back to the world of sociological communication and thinking about it in this introductory level, part of what the critical media theory approach does is looks at how the economy is functioning, and we want to talk about the attention economy, right? The apps, the algorithms that suck our attention away and and that has effects in all of our life. That makes it so we can't go to the bathroom without having the phone there to distract us. These videos become shorter and shorter. Now you can like double speed a TikTok. You can sit and double speed it. And that has effects in the classroom when you're a professor and you're trying to just ask your students to just pay attention to you for 5 minutes to get through a thread, or to have a conversation at their group and they talk for 2 minutes and then are back on their phones. And so I
just have to say, yeah, it really, I mean, I don't like teaching at the university because of that. I mean, I did almost 7 semesters as a discussion leader. I tried so many of the different tricks they teach in the teacher training center or whatever. And a lot of it's like on activities and discussions and fun games and ways of mixing it up and icebreakers and all this. But it just becomes this little like tit for tat thing, and then people mope off, or they're all roommates and they're just having fun anyway. And it's like, look, there's always that table where some people are genuinely curious and they're thinking big ideas, but it being the exception instead of the rule, and it being like a big surprise that this is part of what we're here to do, it's difficult. And my heart goes out to the people who are trying to swim upstream in that situation.
Yeah. And so attention is such a crucial part to, I think, all of the things that we want to do in our lives that require leisure and require some effort: learning an instrument, learning a language, reading a book, even going to the movie theater and watching like a beautiful film that someone has created, to be able to lock in for an hour and a half to nowadays 3.5 hours. Yeah, thank goodness for that intermission in The Brutalist. But it's especially important for conversation, this idea of conversation that we're all trying to flesh out right now, because it's something that Dave got to that earlier. I was like, oh yes, this is an important part that Daniel talked about as well, is that conversation is not just you being able to talk and follow your own thread and allow that to play out, but your ability to follow someone else's thread and let them say their piece. I think communication and the way that it gets played out in our everyday interactions, as well as the way that text messaging even becomes this you, now you, now you, now you. I think we think that that's how it's just supposed to be. That's what's fair. That's what's equitable or equal, is you go, I go, you go, I go. And not too long. You can't go too long. Can't have one person dominate the conversation. But that's where the good stuff comes, is when someone is able to get through a thought and then someone else is able to respond to that thought and say their own thought. And that following someone else requires some attention. And so when we think about the attention economy and the algorithms and the social media, and we're critiquing, the attention economy and the way that these algorithms were designed to steal our attention and to literally make it worse. But there is something to be said about, like, in the same way Sherry Turkle is going to say, reclaiming conversation, like reclaiming our attention, in a society where we do not have time energy. We're all barely struggling to pay our bills and afford healthy food. Like, I think a radical action is like doing your best to reclaim some of your attention, or coming into a freer relationship with technology, as we all talk about. And so I don't know who wants to take it from here, but
We're all,
what we gotta do.
we're all broke when it comes to attention because we paid all our attention in the attention economy.
all.
Also, joint attention. I'm sure Daniel's going to get into this, and I'm excited for it. But one thing I just a few weeks ago at this point, I don't even know when it was, because my attention span isn't quite that long. But we were on the road, and we were talking about language, and we were talking about exchange, and how language has become this kind of mathematized system of exchange, so that, like, the language games we play where, oh, you can't say that to this person because this person belongs to this particular class, this particular category. Like, it is just games. But, like, when you take it seriously, you implicitly on board the fact that the ambiguity, the fact that language does have multiple pathways, the fact that the speaker of the word is just as important as the word itself, and the context in which they speak the specific word matters just as much as the word itself. But language itself has been captured. Language itself has been turned into economics. And if anyone saw yesterday when we were pondering whether or not the economy is separate from the human, and I think we all had great answers. And I think I came down on the economy might be the basest part of that base part of whatever the human is. And
right, this was the question from Jasper about the economy versus the human, and then that was also when Studebaker brought in that the traditional sense of economy is the thing under which, like, like the foundation for everything else, including the public, including conversation, including all of it, right? But then in modernity, the economy is not your household; it becomes this global mode of production.
Becomes inverted, inside outside. Your guts are on the outside.
Exactly. Yeah. And joint attention was one of the really cool threads from the other night that we definitely want to come back to here in a sec. But I wanted to set up, on the one side, we've kind of talked about this tit for tat exchange value kind of conversation, where the conversation is a commodity. I'm here for my McChicken. I'm here for my McMuffin. I'm here for my G2 pen. I want the exact same kind of thing. I have like this sort of standard of like ideal, like this ideal form in mind of like this perfect kind of exchange where I hear you, you hear me, and oh yes, it's so special. Now I go back to work, and it's emotional. There's emotion. There's the vulnerability is supposed to be this sort of like, I'm in my feels, holding space for yours, and all this, and I guess I think that there is a place for it, right? I've been in these kinds of spaces. I can't say whether they actually did anything positive for me or not. I could say that I don't want to go back to them anymore. I spent like 10 years doing stuff like that, and I just don't like to be a part of it. And I'll leave. And then those people come and they try to post up in the Agora and they think that's what it's all about. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's cool. But like, we're kind of doing something here. And so I guess I kind of want to think a little deeper about what is it that we are doing, or what is it that we do want, and what's the baby in the bathwater of that kind of openness, that kind of emotionality, that kind of vulnerability. What's the baby in that bathwater? What are people reaching for that maybe there is something there to get your hands on without giving yourself over to that tit for tat exchange value kind of mode? But before I hand it to you, there's an opposite version of that. And it's a kind of indifference to the others. So it's like, let's just say that all you guys, let's just say we had an audience you know, Will's over here, you know, and we've got Cesar and Gabriella and Spencer and Cleo. Yeah, and we've Michelle's bouncing around. It looks like we got a little Reed over there. Yeah, we have running by. And, you know, at the point that your people are all like dry-eyed and fidgety and yawny or like looking for the nearest exit, checking their watch, and you're still talking, you're doing the opposite of that tit for tat thing. And so I think some people think that if you talk for, 5 minutes straight, because you've got a big thought, you're trying, sometimes people think you are that person who's indifferent to the others, right? And it's like, I don't know, I feel like the tremendous responsibility so that if someone does yawn, I'm instantly like, oh, okay, I better throw a table or smack a board or switch it up somehow because I'm getting boring. And of course, that's not always the case. A lot of times with classes at 3 p.m. or 4:30 p.m., people, they're going to do a little bit of that. But I am looking for a certain kind of engagement. And there's a kind of person who will come into the sort of discursive space or whatever. And then they'll just start talking. And it's like, there is not going to be an end to it. And it's also not obvious that there's even a thread there. There might be 20 threads, but it's like they can't even tell you which ones that they're holding on to because they're just like all over the place. And it's like they're not trying to actually like hand these things over and say, hey, what do you think about this? Like, I personally want to put the thread of the thing I'm thinking about, the ideas. I want to run those through your hands. Like if it's a thread, I want you to be like quality assurance checking the thread. And so we're all sitting here putting our hands over it and going, yep, okay, that makes sense. I'm following the thread. And then it's like, oh, we pause for a second to talk about the skunk outside. Have a good laugh. Oh, that was funny. Yeah, well, that happened last night. That's crazy. But then we're still on the same threads. Right. And I think that's like that's the cool thing. I like that thing. I like that. I think maybe that's conversation. But then this.
And you need to crack your fingers and then you keep knitting.
Yeah. But it's conversation is knitting with other people. Right. Whereas and we can probably pull up a cool image of people who are doing the fancy kind where it does take multiple people doing it. Right. Or you could also say it's like music and you're jamming and it's harmonization and all of that kind of stuff. But I guess, yeah, I'll put on the one side, if it's this tit for tat micro exchange thing, on the other side, it's like this sort of oblivious, I'm the only person in the room, I talk forever. And I'm not aware that I'm sucking all the life out of the space or that there was a whole queue of other people hoping to ask a question and now no one else gets to go and no one even knows how to respond to what I said because I couldn't even summarize it in close. But handing it back over here, I just feel like that's this sort of distinction that I wanted to bring up, the tit for tat versus like the go on forever. And then, yeah, we'll also want to bring in that joint attention thing in our last 15 minutes.
No, fantastic. A few things. First, I'm of the opinion that you train your capacity for attention in training your capacity for conversation. Like conversation actually trains attention. And then attention, as you gain that, the more you can attend to your world to bring into conversation and it becomes a feedback loop. There is a very interesting connection between how people use language and their ability to have attention. That would have to be expanded on, but I am strongly of this opinion. And I think also that's why that's where there's something about attention that is tied to say, can you read a long book, right? Not, because there's something about that actually is training that muscle. And this is where then, if with your friends, you have conversations that are conversations, not communication, that will actually train you, you could say in a very practical sense, it gives you the practical capacity of attention to practice being human when you go into the world, as opposed to if you don't train attention, the only practice you can do is pragmatism that tends to serve the system, right? So I think conversation trains attention. Second, I think on the idea of, Bernard once said, a conversation is too long the moment it ceases to be interesting. So after 1 minute, it could be too long. After 20 minutes, it may not be long at all, right? Because it's still compelling. It's still interesting, right? What's very interesting is because if you say, a long if someone speaks for a long time, that's good. Well, that's actually another quantitative move, just like saying short tick for tat. You're actually still making a quantitative assessment. So it's not long for the sake of long. That is good. It is some sort of, like you're saying, keeping the thread, right? Well, this is where actually, this is where listening actually comes in. And listening is different from mere hearing. Yeah. Listening is where you're paying attention to the tone, right? And let's take, you mentioned music, and I'm obsessed with that, with jazz metaphors. When you have a guitar solo, like when you're jamming and someone becomes the anchor and you pass it off to the guitar. If the guitar guy goes on for 30 minutes and it's a freaking guitar solo, nobody cares because it's amazing. Yeah. But if you go off to the guitar solo, but a good guitarist can hear, I don't quite got, oh, this is good, I'm losing. Okay, go back to the string, go back, pass it, right? Let's go back to the melody or something, right? Good improvisations entail everyone is listening to how it is fitting together. Right? So the issue is often when you have the droning on, it's where people are not listening. You know, you don't have the ability to listen to yourself and to listen to how what you're saying matches with and aligns with other people. So it's a listening problem. But then, of course, this is the problem. And Guy Senstock makes this point. It's great. There is a difference between hearing and listening. Like we don't know the difference between hearing and listening. And I think it's similar to the difference between communication and conversation. Listening is where you actually are calibrating what you will say relative to whatever people say. Like you're changing your thinking, you're saying, okay, what would be appropriate here and what would be fitting, right? You're making judgments. Listening entails a certain judgment because when I start speaking, I want the person who just spoke and everyone who just spoke to feel like I am speaking with them, not that I was waiting for them to be quiet. Hearing is simply cause and effect. Oh, I hear you stop, therefore I start talking, and it has no relation to what was. Yeah, you've just got a preset.
To say what you're gonna say.
Yeah, that's correct.
Instead of paying attention to the other person and allowing the response in relation to that to come about versus, oh, he's talking about this. So what am I going to say next?
Yeah. And
that reminds me of that.
Yeah. Like, absolutely. And there's a weird way in which the communication tit for tat, I send a text, is actually kind of similar to that. You're just waiting. It's not even like you're just waiting. Oh, now it's my responsibility to send a text back. Now it's my responsibility. You're not even deeply invested. It's more of just making sure you meet the quota. Right. So that listening, that where you're calibrating and you're sifting and thinking, what would be appropriate for me to say that would keep the music going, that would make the other people feel like we're in a conversation together, that would also, when I'm finished, give them something to respond to. You're also thinking about that. I don't want to be finished and then everyone be like, we don't know what to say. You're thinking about, can I say, if I say these 5 points based on what I've heard the other people say, there's a fairly high chance that one of those will be something they can hook to. And if not, they'll be able to say enough about that to transition to the next thing. And whatever they say has a high probability of building upon what was just said. The key character, and then we could talk about joint attention, but I'll pass it before then. I think a distinct joint attention, right? But that could depends. Role. Different. Yeah, I was about to say joint, like attend to that. But I think basically the key difference is between when communication and actually people determine intimacy by the quality of their conversation. They really do, subconsciously or not. When you talk with people, the difference is between people who you talk with who are constantly changing topic versus people you talk with who deepen topic. Changing topic is what makes things feel like communication and shallow. There's a constant changing topic, right? Like I talk with you. Deepening topic is conversation. So communication is changing topics where conversation is deepening a topic, right? And actually, I really do think that we associate our deep relationships with people we feel like we deepen a topic with, right? But people whom when you talk with, they're constantly changing the topic or the topic keeps getting changed. You associate that with shallow and fragmented, actually. Now, that doesn't mean as you deepen a topic, you don't shift topics, but there's a logic that gets you there. Whereas when there's a changing of topic, it just feels very stiff breaks, right? And it feels like stop, stop, stop. Well, conversation is where you don't do that changing problem. And what can happen if someone drones on or they go into the quantitative, it moves into a changing of the topic. Because if I don't know how to respond to the person who goes on, then it feels like the topic was changed. And then we are having to ignore what was said, which is awkward, and you kill the vibe. right? So vibe and music, these things all go together. And basically then basically joint attention, which I think is the sublation of memetics, which would have to be, as we talked about, and we'd have to talk about this. Joint attention is what emerges between people who succeed to listen and speak in a manner that maintains the vibe that then we're all invested in. Also then between us, I guess, and if I'm incorrect about this, forgive me, Cleo, I believe Derrida speaks of the chora, which is a certain space within a space. And what you're trying to do in conversation is create this kind of space within a space where something opens up. You're in the garage, agoraja, and then a space opens up where there's an unknown that is very alive, not unknowable. Well, that's another way to put it. I think in communication, you feel like the people around you are unknowable, where in conversation, you feel like you're exploring an unknown. And it's process and it becomes engaging, right? We spoke about this in the kitchen. If I say to you, those mountains are unknowable, then you say, oh, okay. But if I say those mountains are unknown, ooh, interesting. There's something to do. What ends up happening with the people that you learn to converse with, you feel like when you go into the presence, there's an unknown. It's unknown what could occur, but that unknown is exciting and it's exhilarating. And that then inspires you to do it. And it's infinity. That's why the conversation goes for 5 hours and you hardly noticed. Communication just feels like a perpetual totalization, and therefore making things that are unknown. And if they're known, they're trite. And one wants to fight that.
Yeah. Now, maybe we will go a little into memetics. I know that Cleo's deep into the world of taking Girard seriously, and you are as well. And you were just talking to us about this need to sublate the memetic. What does that even mean? Well, thankfully, any student of mine knows full well they can just treat that as a algebraic placeholder, and we can come back to it when necessary. And so maybe we will touch on it, maybe we won't. We don't have to. Now, I do want to say, in the remaining few minutes here, before we close out, if anybody here on the Zoom side or Mr. Will, if any of you have something you would like to throw our way, because you can be a part of a conversation where you didn't even say anything. So a lot of you are part of this conversation in a strong sense because you're slipstreaming it in a sort of way. It's not interpassive, like, so it could be purely interpassive, like canned laughter. Listening to us is having a conversation by proxy. Listening to a podcast is having a conversation by proxy. Joe Rogan Experience, call me daddy, whatever. Like that, whatever is your cup of tea, you're scratching the itch for conversation by having other people play it out for you. And then you go back to your lonely little world. But you feel satiated, you feel fine, you feel like, oh yeah. And then you end up in these things where you're trying to have a good conversation with somebody, but all they can do is refer to podcasts that they listen to. It's like the worst conversationalists I've ever met are the people who love podcasts so much and they just collect them. And it's like, you're just a weird eavesdropper. Like it's like there's a bunch of houses in town and you like go stick your ear through the window and you're like, oh, I heard what they said. They said something cool. And it's like, yeah, I bet they did. Could you just talk to us? Like, do you have to? It's like, I mean, I imagine some people might feel similarly when we name drop if we're not careful, but I think we are careful. I think the way we do it, we're just keeping the ancestors alive and part of the conversation. But the podcast can be a way for you to learn how to have conversations with others. But then again, at the point that every conversation starts to feel like a podcast, man, I'm just like, that's not real conversation because you spend too much time interpassively consuming conversations. You fall into what? Mimesis. Yeah. And so maybe we'll have to bring that up, but please raise your hands in the Zoom if you would like to throw something our way here. That will work into our closing statement. What does she say here?
I love that bit about keeping the ancestors alive. Yes, Cleo. Me too. I love that bit.
Yeah, that's how I feel in your living room, the dining room, what do you call that room?
The living room.
Okay, the living room. It's got a lot of books. Yeah. Floor to ceiling.
I think something that I talked about with my students last semester in Social 122 is having an attitude towards reading as maybe it's not necessarily conversation, and maybe this is a distinction we can flesh out on another day or briefly here, but like dialogue and coming into a dialogue with someone who's either dead or alive, and thinking about that as a way to practice our communication skill or our even our conversation skills in a sense, following what someone else has said, and then maybe we write about it, maybe we reflect on it as a way to respond. So I think, in terms of thinking about practicing our conversation to regain some attention, conversation's a great way to do that. I know that I'm sure that Dave has brought up in this class already Michael Downs' piece, Levinas and the Phone. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, everybody read it. Yeah.
Yeah, that basically makes the argument that we need to have more phone calls because talking to someone, hearing their voice is a great way to really be with that other person and know them and know their face. But I think reading is, and challenging ourselves to read, even if it's like literally 1 page a day, that's more than most Americans. A paragraph a day at that, the other night in here, we all took turns reading like a few paragraphs from a book. And that was more reading I'd done all week, So these little things that we can do and inject into our day-to-day lives to slowly but surely kind of build up that attention, build up that ability to have conversation. Reading, writing, speaking. Really, those are the things. So with
Maybe some music. Yeah, and I just want to finish that thread that I was weaving there just to say, so we'll go to you, Cleo, in a second here. We'll let Nance say something, but I was just trying to say, yes, a lot of people can be listening to podcasts in this interpassive way, but when you are instead thinking with and planning on doing something with that, not just referring to it at the coffee shop with your friend later. No, but like actually write something or make your own little monologue or podcast or whatever that you expect other people will listen to deeply eventually and respond to. That's the thing, is you could listen to Theory Underground for 7 years and then write a banger book. And that's a genuine sort of counter gift, as opposed to just like, oh, could I get in on a, and so like, I mainly say this just so no one feels like I'm trying to call you out as an interpassive. No, you're multitasking, you're listening, you're slipstreaming. It's great. So yeah.
And mentioned reading, writing, speaking as these things that we can do, as a kind of intervention on reclaiming our attention, reclaiming our humanness, reclaiming conversation, all these things. And that, like reading, writing, speaking, we've spent so much time thinking about what it is we're doing, what it is we're trying to do. And I mean, yes, I think of myself as a writer. Yes, I think it is also true that I am someone who speaks. I mean, I've spoken for hundreds of hours on the internet. And I read a lot. So reading, writing, speaking are all part of this thing. And what is this thing? Is this thing conversation? Is this thing thinking? Is this thing humanness? Is this thing trying to enter the ethical dimension? I don't know, but I do know that to break it apart and to fetishize any one of these aspects diminishes your facilities or your faculties, or maybe both, to be able to engage in like a robust dialogue, a robust train of thought, a robust weaving of whatever threads. There are people who just want to read an essay. There are people who just want to write an essay. There are people who just want to listen to a podcast or just listen to a lecture, or they just want the one thing. And I think it has to be all. Yeah. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Reading, writing, thinking. Is it in that order? Is that what he says? Reading, writing, thinking in that order?
It sounds like it.
Yeah. And I think we've even said it's reading, writing, thinking is reading, writing, speaking in that order. And then everyone tries to skip the first 2 steps, and then they're and then it's communication, right? The media matters, and being media literate across all the different forms that influence us matters, because otherwise it's like with words, right? The words are working on us, or we're using them. right? Like which way is it?
Be a Luddite.
Ooh, but okay, really quick here. Let's go to Cleo. Yeah, let's go to Cleo here.
Hmm. First of all, just always loving you guys. Conversation. I've been in exile a long time, so it's lovely to be in your company. Just wanted to say a couple of things. Importance of silence, importance of being able to tolerate silence. I think this is really, really important. This is, of course, something you run into if you try to meditate or whatever, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual capacity to sit in silence. This is something my grandmother, speaking of ancestors, was a past mistress of. She had a swinging seat on her porch, right? And she sat in that seat for hours. And the quality of her silence probably did more to establish my sanity as a child, good, because my parents were nuts. I know your parents were not nuts, but mine were nuts, okay? Than anything else in my childhood. I can still taste the quality of that silence. And I just want to add to that, that those of you who've hung out with me, you probably know that I am finding myself, which is a great, amazing thing in my older years, much more in contact with and enmeshed with Indigenous people than I ever expected to be in my community. And we've been holding a lot of ceremony here, one way or another, for various things. And I have neighbors in the Micmac tradition who are really expert at the talking stick thing. And they have explained to me stuff about that that I really didn't get. First of all, it's a great practice. But secondly, one of the things about it is when you have the talking stick and you pass it around, when you're speaking, other people are really not supposed to respond to you in any way by their body language or by grunts of assent or by gestures or anything else. They're supposed to sit still and allow a silence to happen around your speaking. So one of the things about the talking stick is in passing it back and forth, it makes a pause, right? It takes a minute to pass the stick. And there's an automatic silence between the end of one person speaking and the beginning of another person speaking, which actually changes the quality of the speech in a really interesting way. Now, that is not always the case. That would be the case in a council which was debating a serious action. There are many more informal ways to be around a fire and to pray together and all that where that is not the case. But this is that situation. And the other thing that it makes you very aware of is, I think that's why I loved your comment about the ancestors, Dave, is that the silence and the stick represents the conversations of the ancestors that have been had in that circle previously. So your ancestors are there listening. There are other people in the room than the people who are really physically present. And that is true. I mean, there's the big other, of course, right? We know all about that. But there are also more benign presences, if I can put it that way, and allowing the silence, allowing those spirits, as I would put it that way, to have their say in that silence will really change the quality. I'm amazed. I'm really amazed at the quality of the dialogue I've been able to have with my neighbors, who are a wide variety of people from, right to left, to put it that crudely. The quality of the conversation that we can have here is truly extraordinary from these practices and from a deeper understanding of them than I ever had. I mean, I had the talking stick thing. We all had that in grade school, but I had no idea the depth of the reflection and metaphysics behind that, quite consciously, in those traditions. So that's what I have to say. Anyway.
Yeah, I know that the silence, even just like the pause when you're giving a speech or presentation, is something that, like, I think Dave is especially really good at doing in giving lectures, and it's why he kind of challenged the 15-minute limit. Excuse me, at LAC, because there were these presentations that I got to see that were wonderful, But because they only had 15 minutes and this pressure to go even shorter than 15 minutes, you're trying to follow someone's thought and they're going, okay, so this is what Lacan says, and then he does this, and then I'm going to read this quote now. And you're like, I can't process what you're saying
Yeah,
versus
absolutely.
say a thought and then it's take a moment. You actually have time to like process that, and that contributes to the quality of the conversation, I think. So I love that point on the ability to sit with silence both in the conversation, but like practicing silence as a way to practice attention, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, exactly, Anne. Exactly. Silence as a way to practice attention. That's precisely. Precisimo.
All right, and so let's just do a quick little check-in here. We're at the hour and 9-minute mark, and to get this closed out on time, I know time constraints, and limitations. It's freedom in a sort of sense, and so though I do wish that the course had been one that was based on the idea of 3 hours once per week instead of hybrid, which the social 122, it's hybrid, meaning that they're supposed to do a ton of work online, but it's like anyway, so it's just not the same as being able to do like the once a week 3 hour. I love those kinds of classes. Well, maybe someday, but for now, in close, we've covered a lot of ground, but basically I've got my notes here. On the one side, where the where the virtuous circle has broken down and we have the vicious cycle, everything falls into scripts and quotas and never being mystified by words. It's just these sort of scripted games. People are hearing instead of listening. There's no sort of sense for fittingness or tending, caring, cultivating the threads and the real presence of the other. Maybe I do want in our closing thoughts here, and I'm kind of give Daniel the out, like the last word. We can each get a quick little interjection on that thing as you say our goodbyes, but maybe touch on the vulnerability thing, because people typically you're very pro vulnerability. We are all very pro vulnerability, honesty, truth. We care deeply about this, but somehow that gets caught up in this other thing that we were talking about earlier. And so, I'd like to maybe hear something on that, but I'm really glad that people got to listen to this. I'm very happy because people who are coming into proximity to us are probably wondering, like, what are your expectations for conversations? And I think that this is probably a solid episode for giving people a sense for where we're coming from and how we think about it.
Yeah. I just want to close really quick by saying that we're all at Theory Underground still theorizing conversation and practicing conversation. And it's like an everyday struggle with battling for our own attention and having meaningful conversations. I know that I don't always do it right. And so I'm just really grateful to be here with the Gardeners, to be here with you all in our garage, to have people like Cleo and Spencer, and it looks like Cesar is there, joining us in like all kind of taking on the task of practicing this thing that makes us a little bit more human, because there's a lot of forces that are making it really hard for us to have genuine conversation. And so if we can every day try to do some things that allow us to get a little bit closer, to practice real conversations, to practice the things that are going to build our attention, that's all we can do. And so we're not perfect. I'm not perfect, but I love that we get to have these conversations with each other.
Yeah, I think one thing I love to do is play with words, because words are mystifying and words are magical and words are wonderful. And you can't do that in this mechanical and this like very one-to-one communication thing. But when you're in a conversation over time, as the person gets to know you and you get to know them, they get a sense for those gaps and for why you might prefer specific words, or just like the joy that I get from saying gadgets and gazmos as opposed to gadgets and gizmos, like the fun little things that we all do, dot the T's and cross the I's, stuff like that. But those are things that can only emerge in conversation as opposed to communication. And that's humanness. That is being human. That is refusing this kind of command to be instrumental and saying, let's play.
No, magnificent. I think when I think vulnerability, I think about what we need is the vulnerability of the jazz improvisation. When you go on a stage and you don't know what you're going to play, and yet you're going to be in a position where people will see you mess up, or the people around you will see you miss a beat. There's a real vulnerability. But the problem is it's the vulnerability of risk, seeking to do something excellent with other people. It's not the vulnerability of your deepest, darkest secrets and what you're feeling and so on and so forth, right? It's the vulnerability of putting yourself in the middle of something where you're going to have to rise to the occasion, and can you do it? But you see, what ends up happening in a good conversation is the other people there. This is why catching the thread is so important. In a good jazz improvisation, if you miss the beat, the other people just go with it. They just catch it and they keep going, right? So what ends up happening also, if people are not able to catch threads, then that also leads to the inability to, trust in the people around you, that as you go into this vulnerability to attempt to explore something and to make something that's never been made before, that they will be there to catch you. But if they are there to catch you, then you naturally create trust. Then you naturally create a certain intimacy because they actually went with you. They were listening enough to you to catch your thought and to go with it. Right. And so I think metaphorically, when we don't understand vulnerability because we associate it with emotional expression. And you see, what's lovely, though, about music, does not music entail emotion? So what you're doing in the conversation is actually bringing the emotion to a higher geometry. But when you use the emotion directly, then it actually becomes too forceful because it hasn't been cultivated into something. It's like it's like giving someone the raw ideas for your novel and saying, here it is. And it's like, well, I don't quite understand it, as opposed to the processed working through cultivation of it, right? But again, this is where, to start closing, this is where the reading, writing, and speaking have to go together, because the only way you're going to do a jazz improvisation is if you've been practicing and working to bring something to the conversation. And if you've been doing that work, then you can jam, right? If you haven't, then the only way to understand vulnerability is to bring what you've brought, which is your emotions and what you're feeling. You always have those. I mean, it's just the course of human affairs that tough stuff has happened, or you feel misunderstood, or this, that, or repressed. So you have that. But the problem is it's too at hand. Like, those things are too at hand. They don't have to be cultivated in the way we're describing. But if, in fact, one does do this cultivation, you have the experience in conversation that, wow, something unexpected can be created that's really cool. I doubt in the history of the world there has ever been two jazz improvisations that are exactly the same. I doubt there has ever been. I doubt in the history of the world there has ever been two conversations that are the same. Now, I think there's probably been a lot of communication that's the same. I think there's a lot over, all of the reiterations of communication that are very, very similar. The beauty of conversation is you discover this capacity to have a one-of-one experience that every single time has this certain energy, and you become mystified by this possibility. And then critically, you learn in that it's possible to bring this everywhere you go in your life. If it's possible here, why can't it be possible on the walk? Why can't it be possible at work? Why can't it be possible in your writing, in your reading? If it's possible here, could it be possible everywhere? And then you have a mystery to explore, a journey to go on, that then brings about motivation, that then brings about excitement, and brings you back to the conversation to ever, ever, ever taste that of which sent you on that journey in the first place. And that's a fire that you then live with, that keeps you warm for a very, very long time.
Yes. Give it up. Give it up. Give it up for Daniel. Give it up for us. Give it up for Virginia. Give it up for this beautiful estate. Give it up for, by the way, Leo, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to mute your video there. That was an accident. I did not mean to deface you. But yeah, everybody, thank you so much. We're going to close this out right now. Keep it prompt and tight and short for everybody. But if you're in the Zoom call, go ahead and hang around. We encourage you to hang around after we are gone and chat for at least 3 minutes. I like to ask people that, stick around for at least to say, what do you think about that? Any thoughts about that? And then have a conversation, because great connections are made that way. But everyone, thank you so much. And also Spencer, I'll see you in a little bit, I think, right? All right. Take care, everybody.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.